one of our friends let us stay in their beach house the last couple of days. So we took that in,
Nice.
went to Orange
Yeah.
County, but we're back in the loft. So we're we're here. But a lot of our churches in the same boat,
Of
braving it
course.
out, 600 square
Yes.
foot environments, and so
Wow.
good that we go through it, I guess, with them, maybe just to feel what they feel. And
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, our only job is to stay in. Past generations had to go to war, so I think at the same time it is a mental war, but it is tough.
Yeah. I saw that on social media. Our grandparents, had to go to war. We had to sit on the couch, and I get
Yeah.
that. But I also thought, but our grandparents were not wired like women are wired today. Our
Mm,
grandparents were not career women. They didn't have jobs, and so our grandparents were not moving from a busy career to being stationary on a couch. And the psychological shift in that is massive
wow.
for the women today. So our grandparents lived a static life anyway compared to the women of now. So I thought it's a nice post, but it's actually not like for it's not apples and apples.
Yeah.
Grandparents and your wife and the women that are your contemporary age group, they are very busy. They live outside their careers. They're
Yeah.
not sit at home, stay at home mums like our grandparents were. So sitting on the couch isn't as easy as that post makes it sound, when a lot of
Yeah.
these women are used to being very busy, big careers. So it's a massive
Yeah.
psychological shift, for all of us. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, in our situation, it's men and women because they've shut down
Right. Exactly.
all the jobs. And I was thinking it's a mental war,
Yeah. Yeah.
a mental war on, there's a lot of depression going on, a lot of,
Right.
even in our own staff, we're just helping people through, like,
Right.
anxiety, I've had battles with anxiety,
Yeah.
different things like that. But I was watching the other day. I mean, I'm now a big fan of your internet, your social media, and learning so much from you and your wisdom and everything.
Great.
And just such good content all the time. And then I love that you have a man bun, so it just kind of worked out. But
All
I was
right.
we've been doing like a lot of these different, give a call and connect to someone around the world, hear their heart on
Sure.
the situation. One thing I wanted to talk to you about is um, I was watching one of your posts, and I think it was just you just went Instagram live and you started talking about, I'm saying it in this way. I don't know what exact words you used, but it was like the idea of thriving versus surviving, and this
Right.
and that in this storm you don't have to
Yeah.
survive, and
Yeah.
actually if you try to survive, you don't know how big the storm is. And you were talking about, you know,
Yeah.
going down into the bottom of the ship and bucking down the hatches and just waiting the
Yeah.
storm out versus going up to the top and putting up your sails. And
Right.
then you were talking even business wise about companies. And so I was just really moved by that. I think I even screen recorded it just so I had it. But it was something that was, inside of me already, something that I was already feeling, but I didn't understand how to put it into words or why I had those words until you said it
Yeah.
out loud.
Yeah.
And we've kind of taken that model on with our church, and
Great.
every staff meeting, we're talking about, all right, who can we hire during this time? So we actually hired 2 guys in this time to add to the social media content,
Wow. That's
one day a
great.
week, not being foolish or anything, but I just felt like, man, exactly what you said. Here's Amazon hires 100,000 employees, and here's
Right.
American Airlines fires everybody. Now, obviously, it's
Right.
not apples for apples, but
Sure.
there are certain companies that are reinventing themselves, now selling ventilators or whatever they're going to do to continue
Yes.
to
Right.
not just survive, but now they're going to thrive in a new lane. Can you
Yes.
talk to our, we're going to air this, and I'd love people to hear your perspective on that. It's very needed. And I think for pastors as well, and businessmen, I have a lot of people that I know, I'm in a pastor text and stuff like that. Awesome guys. They're all thinking great, but I don't think they're realizing this might be the ice age instead of a storm. and
Yeah.
how do we reinvent ourselves? And yeah.
I think the idea that I was speaking about, Jeremy, that you're referring to was the difference between stability and resilience. I think historically, history has not been kind to groups of people that have favored stability over resilience, especially the church. I think historically we have moved to stability, and there's a degree of that which we all have to do in the initial strike of this pandemic or 9/11 or whatever the crisis is through history. There's an initial degree to which we all have to move to stabilizing the ship, sorting out our work life, our finances, our families, and what have you. I get that. But stability is not good as a long-term strategy for recovery and ongoing success beyond the tragedy. I think what's also difficult, and I'm very sensitive to this at this time, with all the voices jumping in on social media, there's a fine line between tragedy and learning for humans, i.e., some people move much slower from tragedy towards learning and growing than others. Some people stay around crisis and tragedy a long time, so voices that are asking them to learn and grow are not welcome. And so it's a fine timing issue to step into this area between tragedy and crisis, and people beginning to come out to think, okay, how can I grow and learn from this? And if you don't time that right, a helpful voice is rejected, not because it was saying the wrong things, but because it came into someone's space too soon. So I'm aware that a lot of people around the world are still in stability mode, and they're not moving yet at all to seeing any gifts of this that are embedded in the pandemic, of which there are many. So I think stability, I understand that at the front end, but stability that weathers the storm, resilience doesn't weather the storm, it uses it to grow and to improve, to get bigger and better, like you're mentioning these organizations that are having to do that now. They reinvent, they diversify, they adapt into other forms of doing business, and they reinvent themselves. And that happens at macro and micro levels. And resilience, I think, favors using what's going on eventually to saying, what is this teaching me? What do I need to figure out about me in this? I was just speaking to camera this morning, actually, that I'll post in a couple of days, about one of the hidden gifts of this pandemic is serendipity. Because many people are finishing up locked down where they didn't choose to be and don't want to be. Because when all the planes were grounded, you were stuck where you were stuck. And I know people around the world that are stuck in other parts of the world, sometimes with family and friends, sometimes in a hotel, and it's not where they wanted to be. They didn't get out in time. I know people that have gone to someone else's house to visit and stay for a while. When the lockdown happened, now they're stuck in that house in that part of the country here, and so on. What they're now saying, many of these people, is we love where we finished up being stuck and want to think about staying there permanently. Also, many people that have lost their jobs and have moved from the tragedy and crisis are now realizing, actually, I'm a happier person in my days now. I don't feel as driven as I was. They say to me, the days go so quickly when I've got nothing to do. Why isn't time dragging? And I think it's because they're happier in doing what they want and having more self-determination than being driven by the clock and the school and the job and the schedule. And I think all of these discoveries are serendipitous discoveries that are hidden in the crisis.
Wow.
So if you have a radar for serendipitous discovery, you are a resilient human, is my point. Rather than just seeing everything as a disaster, everything is a crisis, and we just put our head down and hope when it's all over, we have a job to go to, or we still are married, or we still are a cohesive family, or we have our friends, or I still have some kind of life. That is the stability strategy. And the church through history, I think, Jeremy, to speak about us for a minute, I think we have historically moved to stability, hoping when the crisis is over, whatever it was, that we still have a voice, a relevance, a following, a church membership, some kind of group to speak to, some kind of parish left, to use an English term. And what we are doing historically is we are not handling crisis and tragedy well because we're moving to stability. This is a great time for the church, especially the church, to move to massive reinvention ideas, conversations. I think if we come out of this expecting everything to be business as usual, this, of all other crises perhaps in our lifetimes, this is not going to hand us anything as usual next.
Wow.
Don't you think?
Wow. I don't think it's gonna. I mean, it can't be the same. You know, I mean,
Right.
even with us as the church, to see the impact we were missing. I mean, we were pretty social on social media, but you know, since this pandemic, I met with any influence in our church that was doing well with their social. I met with 4 of them, and they all have, you know, whatever millions of followers, just a couple of the influencers in our church on social media.
Yeah.
And just asked them every question I could to help. And one of the biggest things I learned from them is if you're under 100,000 followers, post as much as you can. Post often, I mean, it doesn't matter. You can't be picky about your
Right.
post. And I think, you know, we were, you know, our following, we were trying to be picky about the exact content. And so now we've just been delivering as much content as possible. And especially in this time, I would have done it anyways in this time, but then them saying that just kind of, you know, opened that floodgate up. And so we're posting as much and as often. And then we're having all these, you know, things for you to do online, you know, workouts online, you know, discipleship online, prayer. Right now, tonight we have a 24-hour prayer night, but it's been bringing more community than when we could meet together. I've never seen our church so close, and obviously tragedy brings you together, you know.
I think too, I think when you use the word community, Jeremy, I think that's one of the words that's going to get redefined through this pandemic, because I think the church in the West, especially in the West, this is not true in the East, but the church in the West, we have an unhealthy attachment to buildings. So I'm hearing in a lot of pastors' voices that are doing stuff online because now they're forced to, even though they weren't really favorable towards that actually. Some of these guys that I know tolerated the online kind of crowd and had this vibe of the online people were kind of the church hoppers, the kind of the non-hardcore church people. They're the floating Christians. And the vibe was kind of that. Whereas T.D. Jakes years ago made friends with them, calls them his online church, and accepts them, includes them in his circle of community. Many pastors still see being online as some lesser form of commitment or engagement than being in a building. And what I'm sensing in many of their voices now is fear that when this is over, many people who for the first time have discovered online engagement will prefer it to come into a building and will not come back. And that's okay. And it's okay because I think we should have got the memo sooner that we are too attached to buildings and we define too many things by buildings, and we use the word of attendance, and attendance is to do with showing up in a building, and commitment is to do with being physically shown to be committed to something, and engagement is defined by being in a room engaging with others. And I think we've made all of those terms to do with being in a community that's focused on a building life and community. What this has done is it's taken that from us, and I think stability says, well, let's hope when we finish they'll all come back to church again. And I've seen posts about, you know, here's what it'll be like the first Sunday back in church, and all these people excited and clapping as a meme. And it tells me that you think that when this is over, you think that's what we're all waiting for, and we are not. People that are not in buildings because they can't be, they're not sitting at home counting the days, or very few of them are, to when we can get back to being in our buildings again. They're not. So voices that are hinting that that's what we're waiting for, to me, are voices that are going towards stability and survival, not resilience and flourishing, because those days I think are over, because we have been too attached to buildings. And this is a wake-up call to us in the Western church that we should never have been over attached to buildings, because this is going to change that.
Pastor Paul, what do you think it is going to look like? Do you think that I know in our community, I think we're liking both.
Yeah,
It's from the vibe I'm getting. At least from the leadership, from different leaders, whatever amount of leaders we have. I'm not talking about pastoral leaders, but just different people in the church that seem connected right now. One thing that they seem like that they're not going to take for granted going to coffee with each other or going outside together or going to a park together. I don't know if church is included in that. But I think us as a church, we've kind of realized, Sunday, we need to treat the online experience different than we were, no matter
right,
what.
right,
It needs to be different. It doesn't just need to be a 40-minute sermon and 30-minute worship. It just doesn't work. When we were watching it was boring. I didn't want to. I flipped the channel on my own service.
right,
So we
right.
change it up every 5 minutes. We're changing to something new. Every 2 minutes if we can, because that's the retention rate.
Right.
And so we need to keep with that. And then we've added online ushers, online greeters, online classes, an online lobby, and so I think we will keep these things, and then also have the in-person experience if you want that. But then the midweek stuff is the major area we're going to be shifting, because we weren't doing, like we did a discipleship on Zoom, 120 people on Zoom. I spoke, and then they did breakout rooms. We were going to do that in person, but I think we may stick with Zoom, even when we come back, because no one had to leave their house. They didn't have to pay for gas. They didn't have to fight through traffic. They could put their kids to bed and then be online. It worked. So we're trying to find that balance when we do come back. Because for me, I mean, I'm excited to get back in a room together and feel that worship with them. But I think we're going to probably be turning our church into a studio rather into like, hey, what do we use this building for? Let's use it to help the poor. Use it for people that want in-person community, but switch our mindset from a sanctuary to a studio. And it's still a sanctuary. And we're broadcasting this out, but we're creating content with these people. We're loving our city. What do you think it's going to look like when people come back? Do you think people are going to be able to make the shift? Do you think lots of churches are going to close down? What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, I think some churches will close down. That will not be a bad thing. Let me just say that up front. And actually, they closed down years ago, and the closing down memo was when they started over-serving the elite inside the bubble and stopped reaching their communities. So they really became irrelevant back then. They were able to keep going with the appearance of relevance because they're servicing a few that continue to come to that church. But in terms of relevance to the unchurched, that stopped years ago. So they really closed down as far as God's concerned a long time ago. What this pandemic may do is give the final death blow to their physical presence, which will not be a bad thing. I think when you spoke about new forms of online engagement, Jeremy, about doing courses and workout things and so on, I think my version of that happened to me 20 odd years ago when I was pastoring, when I went through a massive reinvention of our church. And one of the big things that was key to that reinvention was I realized that for years, as a leader and a communicator, I had been making the fundamental mistake, which most pastors still do, of speaking to Christians rather than speaking to humans. So what you're talking about now, in terms of finding different ways to express a voice of connection and engagement to our community, is you have to become multilingual. Instead of just speaking Christian to the people in the bubble of the church and the sanctuary, what this is doing is making us realize that our language is limited to the people in that tribe. But we have something to say to humans, but we have to find another way to say it without being hijacked by the jargon that's our default mode that we are so blind spotted about using when we only ever speak to the Christian community on Sunday, or that's the only voice that's the only people we have a voice to. I think what this online presence is going to help us to do, and the redefining of the use of our buildings for community rather than just for the church. It's going to help us to find a language that makes us more fluent in human rather than fluent in Christian, and anybody outside the church doesn't know what the hell we're talking about.
Yeah. Wow.
That has been a common problem in the UK because 98% of our country and Europe are not in church and are quite anti-church. And that's because most of them hate church because they've been, I think. And when they got there, they didn't find us like this, which is the open hands of Christ. You know, come as you are is very trendy language now for churches in their marketing. But what we really mean is come as we are, because when we say this in terms of our theology and packaging and marketing, come as you are, everybody welcome. When they come to church, they find us more like this. With a judgmental tone, with a narrow-mindedness. We're threatened by people different to us. We are disapproving of different lifestyles, and they pick that up very quickly and don't come back. So many people are not in church because they've been, and they didn't find that we were delivering what we are preaching, and so they don't come back. What's going to happen now with a prolonged period of no church at all is I think we've got a massive chance now to press refresh on a lot of this stuff. And what you are saying, Jeremy, is we are reinventing, we are resiliently moving towards where can we find new ways to engage a wider audience. In other words, how can we become more fluent in human instead of being fluent only in Christian, wondering why humans don't understand us?
Yeah. Wow. Wow. And I think just knowing, you know, even when you do on Facebook, you do a watch party, and then I'm also doing a watch party, and then I'm seeing all my friends from high school, my secular friends, and I'm thinking, okay, do they understand what's happening right now? Is this engaging to them? And I think that's what made us switch up, you know, some of the things we're doing and how we do it. I mean, most of them don't, you know, when you hear a worship song, they're not thinking to worship. They're thinking, well, it's a nice piece of music, or, you know, it's
right.
I heard it years ago. I forgot his name all of a sudden. The pastor of Saddleback Church, Rick Warren.
Yeah, Rick Warren. Yeah,
said, you know, I love the opera. He was talking about Pentecostal church. So I love the opera, but it's not as fulfilling as if it's in another language. If I don't understand the language, if they don't translate what's happening, I can't connect. And he said, I think the Pentecostal church, or the church that's moving in that, has forgot to connect the language, the barrier. And so I think, you know, we've tried to find that balance, because we, you know, obviously you're not going to survive as a church, even survive if especially a church plant in LA, if you don't understand what you're talking about. Because people are coming into our church and have no clue, even if they want to have a clue, they have no clue, and they'll just feel like they're lost in the dust. I mean, we, you know, for 4 years or 6 years, we did church in a nightclub. So we, you know, next to me was the stripper pole, and you know, one time we did church in a place where they had beds in the nightclub. We just said, just don't sit on the bed, you know. So you could imagine the kind of people that come to our church. They're people that probably don't like church, or have never been to church, you know. So we've constantly had to do that, but now even more, you know.
You guys are still way ahead of the planet in terms of America is a church-going country. So if you
people still have it somewhere in them,
right? And in England and Europe, zero. So in terms of heathens and ignorance towards church and Bible and God, I think we have cornered the market on that in England, especially in the north of England where I am. So our heathens here are professional degree level heathens. I mean, these people invented some sins. They're that good. But I understand exactly what you're saying about the need to, as Rick Warren said, not just sing opera in Japanese or whatever, is exactly right. And I think one of the things I heard Bishop Jake say the other day on an interview, he said, someone asked him about the crisis, meaning the pandemic, and he said, I don't think the pandemic is the crisis. I think the crisis came before the pandemic, which was the mess we were all in prior to this that we didn't pay attention to. He said, I think the pandemic is the disruption following the crisis that we kind of ignored. And particularly in his case, he was thinking, I suppose, of America, you know, the divisiveness of America, how split and separated America is. And I live in America a part of the year, as you know, and I've been coming to America for 30 odd years. And I think he was saying that was the crisis, how separate we were and how we were not speaking each other's language. America was like the Tower of Babel. We didn't speak to each other, and anybody that didn't speak my language was an enemy and someone to be viewed with suspicion and to be excluded. That's the crisis in America. And he felt that this pandemic was the disruption now that has followed up to that crisis. And the combinational, and this is my words now, I thought the combinational punching of the crisis and the disruption, we are hoping is enough to jar us out of our unconsciousness into an awake condition that makes us aware eventually of how far gone we were. And everybody will benefit from that, including the church, providing the church at the end of this do not default back to what we had before this. Many organizations will and will not survive. This is our massive chance, I think Bishop Jakes was saying, to look at ourselves, like you've been mentioning, and to come out of this other side with a totally different version of us. And we're not sure what that looks like yet, but we're certainly sure of some of the tweaks we should be making are that we're singing in Japanese to people to whom that's not their native language. That's why I think we should be fluent in one language only, and that is human. People said to me, how do you communicate when you're speaking in Japan or Indonesia or Singapore or Malaysia? And I say, it's not a problem because I'm trying to be fluent in human, not in Christian. And everyone understands fear. Everybody understands anxiety and loss and suffering and setback and disappointment and tragedy. These are the languages of humanity. And if the church is fluent in those languages, we'll never have a problem of disconnection and non-engagement. But because the church has not been fluent in those languages without doing this, then even though we may teach on tragedy and teach on setback, we teach it in a way that humans can't relate to.
Wow.
And we have a transactional agenda attached to it that people don't want to feel trapped into either.
Yeah.
I think is our challenge, one of the challenges we have,
Yeah, wow. Yeah, we're using our Sunday pulpits to talk deep theology instead of talking hope and,
wisdom for life, I call it,
said, hey, this is not a time for deep theological sermons, this is time for hope. And I'm thinking, well, I think your deep theological sermons, they should be in a different environment. The disciples, Jesus even himself, he did the whole parable of the seeds and he doesn't even explain what it means. Then he goes with his disciples, goes deeper. Here's the theological basis. Well, Pastor Paul, thank you so much. I mean, this has been so eye-opening. I love everything you're doing. And can you tell everybody who's watching where they can get more of this? I mean, obviously your Instagram, I see, but is there other places? I've seen coaching and mentoring that you do?
Yeah, one of the big things I do, in fact, I'm about to launch this as a new resource in the next few weeks, is my communication masterclass. I've done these all over the world live for years to people from all walks of life, politicians and actors and CEOs and pastors and teachers and psychologists and doctors, a communication masterclass. And I've now recorded that to camera to be an online video course that's available in a few weeks' time. So communication been a huge passion of my life, and saying a thing well is a big thing for many people's callings and vocations that are watching us. PaulScanlon.com is my website. Paul Scanlon UK is my Instagram social media feed. So people can track with me on all of that stuff, on all of those places, if they want to find out what I'm up to. And I'm sending much love and praise your way, Jeremy, especially in the part of America that you are in, and especially in the part of LA that you are. You guys have got your work cut out, as you mentioned earlier. And my heart goes out to all of you guys. I pastored for 32 years here in the hostile territory of the north of England. And I built a church of thousands in a country where people do not go to church. So we must have figured something out to do that. And the biggest thing we figured out is we spent too much time in our shoes, not enough time in their shoes. When I made that switch in the late 90s, our church exploded. And so it's coming from that empathy I have with you guys that I wanted to reach the unchurched in America. And I think the gift of the pandemic is it's going to give us a whole new take on us, first of all. We're going to see how much into ourselves we've been, how ego-driven we've been, how narcissistic we've become, how cut off we've become, how much of this we've done. I think if we can see anything of that about ourselves, we'll come out of this much better for the humans that are longing for us and looking for us, but they can't relate to us in the form that we've been. So it's all good. I think it could all be good.
Yeah, the heart of God is just it's taking us through a shifting.
I think so. Yeah,
it's awesome, and we've seen more unity now in the United States than ever before. You know, even our government, like our governor, does not work with Trump. You know, and but right now he is, and they're like talking like they like each other now, and I'm like, this is what we need. You know, we need these guys to come together and put down their differences so we can, you know, and we're trying, but when it doesn't come from the top, it just divides America. So
it's amazing how it takes a crisis,
the gift of the pandemic.
How it takes a crisis to, you know, it's like when they say you'll know this in California with the fires, or in parts of America with the tornadoes or the floods. When the fire and the floods come, they don't care who's Republican and who's Democrat, who's black, who's white, who's gay or straight. Everybody's hit. And so people suddenly start talking to the gay guy who they did this to, or they suddenly start getting help from the Muslim across the road that becomes the most helpful neighbor, or the person with different politics. And suddenly everybody is leveled. The pandemic's doing that. And I think it's a great thing. Yeah, it's one of the hidden gifts embedded in the tragedy. Yeah.
It reveals the heart of God, because the heart of God is at that level where he sees us as sons and daughters, no matter what our stuff is, you know. So
I love that.